Values are really valuable. Values are awesome. If you want your drawings to look three-dimensional and create the illusion of form, you gotta start adding values to your drawings. Lines are great, and they get us really far, but learning how to effectively use values can transform your art. When we talk about value in art, we're not referring to its worth or how much money it costs. A value is simply how light or dark something is. If we take this photo and make it grayscale, you see that my skin is lighter than my lips. And even though the color of the lips and shadows are quite different, their values are much more similar. They're both kind of dark. Value and color. We've learned a lot about lines, but I hate to break it to you, but lines aren't real. We don't see lines. As artists, we use lines as placeholders for the edges of shapes. Lines are a very useful tool for communicating ideas, but it's not what we actually see. It's an abstraction of what we see. What we actually see in reality is light as it affects form. We see that light as an arrangement of colors, shapes filled with colors. And color is made up of hue, chroma, and value. Hue is like the family of colors it belongs in: yellow, red, blue, and so on. You can apply chroma to the hues to describe how pure or gray the color is. You can lower the chroma on this blue, and it's still blue, but it's lower in chroma, a little more gray. And finally, we can describe the value of any color, from white to black. This medium chroma blue is a value 5, but we can shift it in either direction along the value scale. We can make any color lighter or darker. The relationship between these three properties of color can get kinda complicated, and that's beyond this course. The most important part of color is value. At least for artists it is. It's so important actually that artists often categorize it separately. Let's imagine that a drawing is like a building. Each individual steel beam is like a line. We put lines together to make shapes, and that's like the steel framework of the building. Values are like the walls. They fill in the spaces between the framework, making it solid. Values create the illusion of form and depth and volume. Beyond that, you have things like texture and color, which are like the decorations in your rooms, the wallpaper, the furniture. These are details that add to how your art feels. All of these elements are really important. You take any one of them out, and you don't really have a building that you'd want to live in. But the walls, the floor, the roof, these are really important. So as a beginner, it's wise to practice drawing without color at first. Just practice using value to focus on light and form. Once you're comfortable with values, then you can introduce the other elements of color to add more emotional impact. I know it's really tempting to jump to color, but if you want the time that you spend practicing to have the biggest impact, start with values. The value scale. Imagine a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is the darkest black and 10 is the brightest white. This can seem a bit counterintuitive if you think of value as pigment. When we draw, we start with white paper and we add darker values with the pencil.
But in this course, we're going to be borrowing from the Munsell color system.
It's a traditional way of organizing color and value. Instead of measuring pigment, we're measuring light. When we're drawing, it's not very useful to think of the pigment. It's much more practical to think of the subject we're drawing and how the light affects that subject. A value of 10 means that area is getting the most light, while a value of 0 means it's in complete shadow and we can't see anything. Now, in reality, a value scale is a smooth gradation with an infinite amount of values between black and white. But working with infinity, it's not very practical for drawing, definitely not for organizing values. That's why artists typically break it down into steps of values, usually about 10. This is more manageable and makes it easier to communicate. If I say value number 3, you can imagine where that is on the scale. Maybe you noticed that 0 to 10 is actually 11 total values in the Munsell value scale. Some people squish it down to 10 and flip the order. But these numbers, they're just systems. The most important thing that you need to understand is that there's a gradation from black to white, and you can break it up into as many steps as you want. And you don't always have to use all 10 values in every drawing. Sometimes you might choose to work with a limited value scale. Maybe you choose to use 5 values, just enough to represent the main elements of light and shadow. You can also play around with different value ranges within the scale. Maybe your drawing only uses values from 3 to 8, with no deep shadows or bright highlights. Or you can go for a moody drawing, using only darker values from 0 to 5. We'll learn about value ranges in another lesson, and we'll practice with projects. You can get the full course at proko.com/drawing if you want all the value lessons. Our goal is to train your eyes to see these subtle shifts in value and then translate them to something that you can work with on paper. Value sources. There are 4 things that determine the values that we see: local value, light on form, surface material, and atmosphere. For beginners, I highly recommend that you start by focusing on those first 2, local value and light on form. The other 2 are a little bit more advanced, and you should come back to them later. Surface material being what the object is made of. It could be matte or glossy or highly reflective, and that could greatly change the values that we see, even if the light and the form is the same. And the atmosphere refers to the effect of the air on how we perceive things far away. I mentioned this earlier in the course as atmospheric perspective. Local value. Okay, going back to this photo, the value of my hair is darker than the value of my skin. That's local value. It's the inherent lightness or darkness of the thing, regardless of the light you shine on it. The local value of something isn't always consistent and flat. This apple has a lot of variety in its local value and a general gradation from light to dark. Going back to this photo, just one more time, even though my hair is darker than my skin, the value of the shadow on my skin is darker than the highlights in my hair. And that's light on form. You know that when you shine a light on something, it makes it brighter. The value goes up because there's more light. But the value doesn't go up evenly on the entire object. It gets distributed based on the form, where the planes are facing. The part of the object that faces toward the light gets affected the most. But as these planes start to turn away, they get affected by the light less, and so they get darker. Local value and light on form act together. Both of these apples are hit by the same light. But the light side of the red apple is darker than the yellow apple. And the same with the shadow sides. The value of the light and the shadow are both shifted based on the local value. I hope you're starting to see the value of values. If you made it this far, you're probably really serious about learning how to draw. And this was the first values lesson from my drawing basics course. There's a lot more coming if you get the premium version. We're gonna learn about organizing values with value keys and value ranges for better composition, and go deep into light on form. I'll give you exercises and projects to help you practice, and I'll do a bunch of demonstrations and critique videos to guide you along the way. This course already has over 100 lessons about line, shape, perspective. The remainder of this course is all about shading. I hope to see you in the premium section. That's over at proko.com/drawing.